From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
It started with a hole in the ground. Two boys digging in their garden in the north of England. A quiet suburb. A sleepy town. And then, something ancient, something carved, rose from the earth. Two small stone heads. Rough, crude, primitive. They looked like something out of an archaeological dig. But this wasn't a museum site. It was a patch of dirt behind a family home. And almost as soon as the heads came into the house, strange things began to happen. Lights flickered, doors slammed, footsteps echoed down empty halls, and then came the creature. A half-man, half-beast, seen by more than one witness, standing in a hallway, before vanishing straight through a closed door. This is From the Void, and I'm John Williamson. Today we begin one of the strangest and most unsettling cases to ever come out of post-war Britain. It's a mystery that straddles the line between archaeology, folklore, and the supernatural. Some call it a hoax, others believe it was a curse. But whatever it was, it left behind terrified witnesses, a vanished artifact, and a question that still haunts those who lived through it. It was 1971 in the small market town of Hexham, located in Northumberland, in the northeast of England, about 25 miles west of Newcastle. 12-year-old Colin Robson and his younger brother Leslie were doing what kids have done for generations, digging in the garden behind their home at 3 Reed Avenue. That's when they found them. Two small carved stone heads, buried just a few inches beneath the soil, each about 2.5 inches wide, roughly shaped into faces, one male, one female. They were made from a coarse material, believed to be quartzite or possibly local concrete. One had distinct, almost exaggerated features, a flat face, wide eyes, a crown or helmet on its head. The other, more oval and weathered. They were strange. Not the kind of thing you expect to find in a backyard flower bed. The boys brought the heads inside, curious and a little spooked. Their mother, Mrs. N. Robson, thought they were interesting, maybe ancient. She put them on the mantel. That night, the house changed. According to the Robson family, the disturbances began almost immediately. Doors opening and slamming shut, even when no windows were open. Lights turning on and off. Footsteps heard when no one was home. A cold presence lingering in the hallway. At first, they thought maybe the kids were playing tricks. Maybe it was nerves. But then came the moment no one could explain. One evening, Mrs. Robson entered the hallway and saw, clear as day, a figure standing in the doorway. It was tall, covered in hair, a blend of animal and man. It stared at her. Then, without taking a single step, it seemed to glide forward and pass straight through the closed door, vanishing into the next room. She wasn't the only one who saw it. Neighbors would later confirm they saw something strange lingering near the home. One described it as a half-wolf, half-man creature with glowing eyes. Now, it would be easy to dismiss this as hysteria, mass suggestion, a misidentified animal. But it wasn't just one sighting or one house. In the days that followed, other homes on the street began reporting similar disturbances. One neighbor's daughter woke up screaming, claiming something was inside the walls. Another reported hearing heavy breathing near her bed, with no one there. And all of this followed the arrival of two unassuming stone heads. Eventually, word got out. Local newspapers picked up on the story. Paranormal researchers started to take an interest. Were these ancient ritual objects something older than history, or just a strange coincidence? That's when the Hexham Heads were passed along to a woman who would take the case into another dimension entirely. A Celtic scholar, a skeptic, and the next person to bring the heads into her home would see the same creature standing in her hallway. Coming up after the break, Dr. Ann Ross takes the heads to her home. A respected academic, known for her work in Celtic studies, suddenly finds herself caught in a waking nightmare. And she begins to wonder, are these just old stones, or something far older, far darker than anyone expected? After the story of the Robsons made local headlines, the Hexham Heads were brought to the attention of Dr. Ann Ross, one of Britain's leading experts in Celtic mythology and Iron Age history. Ross had worked extensively on Celtic ritual objects and was a respected voice in academic circles. She was, by her own admission, not someone who leaned towards the supernatural. But that changed quickly. When the heads were delivered to her home for analysis, Dr. Ross did what any good scholar would do. She cataloged them, measured them, and placed them on a shelf in her study for examination. And then, the disturbances began. Unexplained footsteps echoed through her house, heavy, deliberate, as if someone were walking from room to room while no one was there. Doors opened on their own, lights flickered, furniture shifted overnight. Her daughter, who knew nothing of the heads, reported waking to find a large, hairy creature standing at the edge of her bed. The description matched the one given by the Robson family. Dr. Ross, again, a woman trained in rational historical interpretation, was shaken. She later described seeing the same creature herself, a tall, half-man, half-animal entity with hair covering its face and upper body. It stood near her hallway, and then, without taking a single step, glided forward and passed straight through a closed wooden door, vanishing without a sound. Ross couldn't explain what she'd seen, but she knew what she felt: fear. And something else: pressure, as if something unseen had entered her home and was pressing against the edges of her reality. The heads remained in her possession for weeks. During that time, the disturbances didn't stop. They intensified. Eventually, Ross decided to hand them over to a colleague for further analysis, a professor of archaeology. And just like that, the activity stopped. Whatever was happening seemed to follow the heads. Unlike many who have handled so-called cursed objects, Ross didn't blame the heads on ancient evil or demonic energy. Her theory was grounded in archaeology. She believed the Hexham Heads were connected to Celtic ritual practices, possibly votive offerings. These carved heads were commonly used in Iron Age Britain, often left in rivers, bogs, or buried as symbols of protection, ancestral reverence, or spiritual guardianship. These heads may have been part of a religious tradition meant to call upon the spirit world. They weren't evil, but they were powerful, and that power didn't die when the carving stopped. She speculated that removing them from the earth may have disturbed something old, a lingering spiritual presence attached to the ritual itself, or perhaps bound to the land they came from. And Ross wasn't alone in this thinking. In parts of northern England, Scotland, and Wales, folklore is filled with stories of carved heads, buried charms, and household spirits, some helpful, some vengeful. The black dog or world spirit is a recurring theme, particularly in Northumberland, where the heads were found. These weren't just stories told to scare children. They were considered real, and sometimes dangerous. Whether you believe in folklore or not, the events at Ross's home mirrored the pattern seen at the Robsons. And once again, when the heads left the house, the strange phenomena stopped. But this story isn't over, because just as momentum was building and researchers began to take a real interest, a local man came forward with a claim that changed everything. He said, "I made them." Coming up next, was it all a hoax? Were the Hexham Heads just garden decorations? Or was this a case of misdirection, meant to bury something no one was ready to explain? When a story starts to gain traction, paranormal investigators, reporters, even academics getting involved, there's always someone who steps in to take the air out of the mystery. That person showed up in Hexham in 1974. His name was Des Craigie, and he claimed to have made the heads himself. That's right, the crude little stone figures that caused months of poltergeist activity terrified an entire family and convinced a world-renowned Celtic scholar that they were tied to an ancient ritual tradition. He said they were just a prank, poured from a mold in his garden shed. And just like that, the story was over. Or was it? Because what Des Craigie offered wasn't closure. It was something messier, something that didn't quite line up. And in the end, his confession may have only made the mystery deeper. In 1974, 3 years after the Hexham Heads were discovered and passed from family to researcher to folklorist, the story took a dramatic turn. A local man named Des Craigie stepped forward and claimed that the entire affair had been a misunderstanding. He told reporters that he himself had made the heads out of cement in a mold during his brief stay at 3 Reedy Avenue. According to Craigie, they were meant to be decorative, possibly part of a concrete experiment or garden ornament. And somehow, he said, they had been buried only to be rediscovered by the Robson children after he'd moved out. He claimed he recognized them immediately when they appeared in the papers. Simple, right? But here's the problem. His timeline doesn't make sense. The Robson family moved into the house in early 1971. The heads were found shortly after, during routine digging. Craigie claimed to have lived there at some point before them, but the available property records and multiple resident accounts place him there after the Robsons had already found the heads. Even if we assume Craigie lived there briefly before the Robsons, he would have had to mold the heads, bury them in the garden, never mention it to anyone, and have them rediscovered years later by total coincidence. But the biggest issue is this. The activity began before the story ever went public, before Craigie would have had any motive to insert himself. And when asked to replicate the heads in front of researchers, he couldn't. He said he used a specific kind of concrete and a mold, but no mold was ever found. No leftover materials, no second set of heads, no photographs, no witnesses. Just a man and his story. This led some to believe that Craigie might have been telling the truth, but not the whole truth. Perhaps he did make a pair of heads, similar in shape, but not the ones found by the Robson boys. Or perhaps someone encouraged him to come forward and take credit in order to kill the growing buzz around the case. It wouldn't have been the first time a paranormal story had been abruptly shut down by an oddly timed confession. The confession didn't just muddy the waters, it erased the conversation. Newspapers stopped covering the story. Paranormal researchers moved on. Even Dr. Ross, whose testimony had been serious and well documented, was dismissed as overly imaginative. And just like that, the heads were quietly packed away. But what happened next is stranger still. Because the Hexham Heads didn't end up in a museum, or in a private collection, or on a dusty shelf somewhere. They vanished. And no one, not even the scholars who studied them, knows where they are. The Hexham Heads sit at the crossroads of hard archaeology and hair-raising folklore. To make sense of Des Craiggie's confession and the decades of debate that followed, we need to walk through the major theories, one by one. Number 1, ancient Celtic ritual objects. Dr. Ann Ross never wavered. She believed the heads belonged to an Iron Age tradition known as the cult of the severed head. In Celtic cosmology, the head was the seat of the soul. Carved stone heads were buried or deposited in rivers as protective offerings. The Hexham Heads' exaggerated eyes, flattened faces, even the hint of a crown, matched known votive heads unearthed in Bath, Gaul, and Northumberland. If Ross is right, pulling such objects out of the earth might have broken whatever protection or containment they once provided. Number 2, stone tape or recorded energy theory. Paranormal researchers of the 1970s loved the stone tape theory. The idea that emotional or traumatic events imprint themselves onto stone and replay under the right conditions. Quartzite, the material many believe the heads are carved from, is piezoelectric, meaning it can store and release small electrical charges. So, did the heads act like cassette tapes for ancient ritual, broadcasting residual energy into the Robson and Ross homes? It's unproven science, but it would explain why the disturbances stopped every time the heads were moved. Number 3, poltergeist psychological catalyst. Classic poltergeist cases often center on adolescence, stress, change, emotional turbulence. In Hexham, 2 preteen boys found the heads. Later, a teenage daughter in Dr. Ross's house saw the Wolfman apparition. Maybe the heads were just a focus object, and the real engine was human psychokinesis. But this theory struggles with the continuity. Activity recurred across households, across families, even when no children were present. Number 4, tulpa egregore, the power of belief. What if folklore itself created the haunting? Northumberland is steeped in stories of phantom dogs that prowl the night. Once newspapers printed accounts of a half-wolf creature, did collective fear manifest the very thing it dreaded? If so, Des Craiggie's confession might have worked, because belief shifted, the tulpa lost its fuel. Number 5, shapeshifter werewolf folklore. Witnesses described a tall, fur-covered figure that glided or phased through solid doors, eerily close to the Scottish wolver, a benign were-creature said to guard hidden treasures. Could an ancient guardian spirit have been dislodged with its totem heads? It's folklore, sure, but the identical creature turning up in 2 unrelated homes still demands explanation. Number 6, straight-up hoax. Finally, there's the simplest answer. Des Craigie told the truth. The heads were 1970s garden kitsch. Everything else, doors slamming, lights flickering, was coincidence, suggestion, or local legend on overdrive. Yet Craigie never reproduced a matching head, never produced a mold, and his timeline clashes with property records. If it was a hoax, it remains an oddly incomplete one. So where does that leave us? Physical evidence gone. The heads vanished sometime in the 1980s. Eyewitness testimony. Multiple families, a respected scholar, independent neighbors. Folklore parallels, rich and strangely specific. Confession. Convenient, but uncorroborated. No single theory ties up every loose end. And maybe that's the real haunting of Hexham. A mystery open enough for folklore to breathe, but grounded enough to keep skeptics sweating. If you dug up a carved face in your backyard tomorrow, would you keep it? This is From the Void. I'm John Williamson, and in a quiet town in northern England, something was unearthed and may never be buried again.